Worthless. So I ended his career in 72 hours. Betrayal uncovered. How I caught my wife cheating him. 34. Male, a structural engineer with a firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm the kind of guy who shows up early, stays late, and genuinely believes that if you do good work and treat people right, things tend to work out. I've built my career on that principle. I built my marriage on it too. My wife and I met in college. 8 years together, 5 of them married. No kids yet. We've been almost ready for about 2 years, which in retrospect was her buying time, not building towards something. She works in marketing. Sharp, social, the kind of person who fills a room. I used to think that was the best thing about her. I need to set one thing up before this story goes where it goes, because without it, the ending doesn't land the way it should. About 7 months ago, my firm merged with a larger engineering company. The merger brought in new leadership, and one of the new senior directors, I'll call him my director, was assigned to oversee my division. He was 42, drove a car that cost more than my first year's salary, and operated like someone who had never once been told no. He had the kind of confidence that people mistake for competence. Loud opinions in meetings, credit for other people's ideas, and a habit of making comments that were just barely professional enough to let slide. He had a phrase he liked to use when he dismissed an idea he didn't like in a meeting. He'd lean back his chair, do a little half smile, and say, "Let's not waste time on something worthless." I heard it aimed at my proposals more than once. My wife met him at our firm's merger welcome event 6 months ago. I introduced him myself. I remember it clearly. She laughed at something he said, and I thought, good, she's networking. I handed him a drink and shook his hand and thought nothing of it. That is the detail I keep coming back to. I handed the man a drink. The way I found out wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no mysterious charge on a credit card. It was a Sunday morning in March, and my wife had left her iPad on the kitchen counter, unlocked, open to her messages. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the TV remote, and my hand brushed the screen, and it lit up. The name at the top of the message thread was my director's name. I stood there for 11 seconds. I counted them afterward, somehow. 11 seconds of just looking at the preview of the last message, which contained enough, 4 words and an emoji, to tell me everything. I put the iPad back down exactly where it was. I walked to the back porch. I sat down, and I thought very carefully about what I was going to do next, because I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. One, I was not going to blow this up emotionally and give either of them a reason to paint me as unstable. And 2, I was not going to let this just happen to me. I'd spent 6 months watching my director take things that weren't his. I was not about to let him have this one too. I went back inside, made coffee, and when my wife came downstairs, I said, "Good morning," and asked if she wanted eggs. She said yes. I made them. We ate breakfast. She talked about a show she'd been watching. I nodded and asked follow-up questions. And the whole time, I was building a plan. The first thing I did that afternoon, while she was at the gym, was call my attorney. Not a divorce attorney. My general counsel, a guy I'd used for a contract dispute 2 years prior. I explained the situation in broad strokes. He told me to document everything before I confronted anyone. He also told me something that I wrote down verbatim. If he's a director of your firm and he's been in a relationship with your wife while supervising you, that's not just a personal problem. That's a workplace ethics problem, and those have teeth. I spent that Sunday afternoon pulling threads. What I found over the next 18 hours was not just an affair. It was a pattern, and that pattern was going to cost my director a great deal more than he had anticipated when he decided that I was worthless. By Monday morning, I had a folder. Not a mental folder, an actual folder organized, labeled, time-stamped. My wife used our shared family calendar for everything. Doctor appointments, dinners with friends, the occasional work event. When I went back through 6 months of that calendar with fresh eyes, I found 11 instances where she had marked herself as working late or client dinner on evenings that aligned exactly with my director's travel schedule, which I had access to through our firm's internal project management system. 11 times. She hadn't even bothered to vary the phrasing. I also found the hotel. My director had submitted expense reports. I had access to the division's shared administrative portal as a senior engineer, and there were 2 charges at a downtown Charlotte hotel on dates that matched her calendar entries. He'd expensed them as client entertainment. The firm's money. That detail sat in my chest like a coal. I forwarded the relevant expense report screenshots to my personal email. I documented the calendar overlaps in a spreadsheet. I was methodical, quiet. Every instinct in me wanted to walk into his office on Monday morning and put everything on the table in front of the entire department. I didn't. I let that instinct sit in a box, and I kept building. Monday afternoon, I requested a private meeting with the firm's HR director. She was a woman I respected, careful, professional, someone who had navigated the merger with real steadiness. I told her I had a concern about a potential ethics violation involving a member of senior leadership. I used those exact words. She cleared her afternoon. I walked her through it. Not the marriage, not yet. I started with the expense reports. Fraudulent business expense claims are taken seriously in any engineering firm. But in a post-merger company trying to establish unified governance, they're a crisis. Her expression shifted inside the first 5 minutes. Then I added the layers she hadn't expected. I explained that the individual in question was in a personal relationship with my wife, that I had evidence of this, and that he had been my direct supervisor for 6 months, during which he had systematically undermined my project proposals, passed my work off in presentations without attribution, and on at least 3 documented occasions made dismissive comments about my contributions in front of colleagues. I had dates. I had meeting notes. I had an email where he'd forwarded a proposal of mine to the VP without my name on it. She stopped me twice to ask clarifying questions. Both times, I had documentation ready. By 4 p.m., HR had looped in the firm's legal counsel. Now here's where my director made his fatal mistake. Someone, I never found out who, tipped him off that I had met with HR. Because at 6:23 that evening, he called my cell phone. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. He skipped hello. His voice had that performance calm that people use when they're actually rattled. He told me I was making a situation out of nothing, that I was clearly emotional, and that I needed to think carefully about what I was doing to my own career by going after someone at his level with unsubstantiated grievances. Then he said it. You want to throw your career away over this? Fine, but understand what you are in this company. You're a mid-level engineer. You're replaceable. He paused, and I heard the word before he said it. Worthless. I let 1 second pass. I'm going to need you to not contact me again, I said. My attorney will be reaching out to yours. I hung up. Then I sat in my car in a Lowe's parking lot for about 4 minutes, just breathing. Then I drove home and made dinner. My wife figured out something was wrong by Tuesday evening. I hadn't said a word about any of it. I'd been a functional, present husband for 48 hours, which in retrospect probably unsettled her more than anger would have. People who are doing something wrong become very attuned to changes in atmosphere. She asked me, over dinner, if I was okay. I said I was tired from work. She nodded. We watched TV. She fell asleep on the couch, and I went through her iPad. I know what you're thinking, and yes, I've been waiting for her to leave it unattended again. It took 2 days. When she finally dozed off, I went through the thread carefully and photographed the most relevant exchanges on my phone. There were enough there to confirm the timeline, the nature of the relationship, and one exchange in particular where my director had referred to me, by name, to my wife as a mediocre engineer who coasted on team credit. My wife had responded with a laughing emoji. I uploaded those photos to a cloud account, added them to my attorney's shared folder, and went to bed. Wednesday morning, HR called my director in for a formal meeting. I know this because a colleague texted me that he'd walked past the conference room and seen my director sitting across from HR and legal with his jaw tight. By Wednesday afternoon, my director had been placed on paid administrative leave pending the investigation into the fraudulent expense claims. This is standard procedure. It's not a firing, but it removes the person from the building while the firm audits the situation. The expense fraud alone was enough. 2 hotel stays totaling $740, expensed as client entertainment with no client name, no meeting record, nothing. In a post-merger compliance environment where both firms' boards were watching financials closely, that was a serious breach. Add the supervisory relationship with a subordinate spouse, which created an undisclosed conflict of interest that violated the firm's ethics policy, and his position became very uncomfortable very quickly. His attorney called my attorney Thursday morning, 48 hours after I'd walked into HR. The call was about settlement, specifically whether I would be willing to limit the scope of my cooperation with the firm's internal investigation in exchange for a severance arrangement and a clean departure. My attorney told them we would discuss nothing that interfered with the firm's independent process. We were not parties to his employment. That was between him and the company. By Thursday evening, my director had resigned. The firm's internal notice, sent Friday morning, described it as a voluntary departure to pursue other opportunities. HR privately confirmed to me that the resignation had been negotiated to avoid a formal termination hearing, but that the ethics findings would be documented in his personnel file, meaning any future employer conducting a thorough reference check would encounter a wall. 72 hours. That's how long it took. From Monday afternoon to Thursday evening. The career he'd used to make me feel small was over, and I hadn't raised my voice once. Now came the part one had been quietly dreading. On Friday night, I sat my wife down and I put my phone on the table between us, open to the photograph of her message thread. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just let her look at it. She went very still. She tried 3 different versions of the same story in the first 20 minutes. The first was denial, a flat, almost insulted, "That's not what it looks like." The second was minimization. It was nothing serious. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. The third was the one I'd expected most and dreaded the same, the redirect. Suddenly, I worked too much. I was emotionally unavailable. She had been lonely. She hadn't felt seen in the relationship. I let her finish all 3. I didn't interrupt. I sat with my hands on the table, and I let her talk until she ran out of things to say. Then I told her I already knew everything. I told her about the calendar, the hotel charges, the message thread, and the call where her boyfriend had called me worthless. I watched her face move through 3 or 4 expressions in about 4 seconds. Then I told her I had filed the divorce paperwork that afternoon. North Carolina has a mandatory 1-year separation requirement before a divorce can be finalized, which my attorney had walked me through. The filing established the legal separation date, which starts that clock. I had already arranged to stay at a colleague's spare room for the interim. I had already separated our joint account and moved my direct deposit 2 days prior, which is fully legal as long as you're not draining a joint account vindicatively. I simply opened a new individual account and redirected my paycheck. She didn't cry immediately. She got loud first. There was about 10 minutes of raised voices, mostly hers, in which she told me I had blown up her life and had no idea what she'd been going through. I told her calmly that I had very much been going through things too, and that the difference between us was that I had handled mine without betraying anyone. She left the room. I left the house. North Carolina is an at-fault divorce state, meaning adultery can be considered in divorce proceedings, specifically in alimony determinations. My attorney had already noted that if she sought alimony, the documented affair would be highly relevant. She did not ultimately pursue it. Her own attorney, I was told, advised against it. The divorce was finalized 14 months after I filed. The settlement was straightforward. The house sold, equity split, no alimony in either direction, clean break. I did not fight for the furniture. I fought for the investment account, which was primarily funded by my income, and I got it. My director, meanwhile, had been quietly blacklisted. Engineering is a smaller world than people think. The ethics finding in his personnel file surfaced during at least 2 reference checks that I know about secondhand through mutual professional contacts. He relocated to another state. I don't keep track of him. I don't need to. The colleague who tipped him off that I had gone to HR eventually apologized to me, said they hadn't understood the full picture. I told them I understood. I meant it. People fill in stories with whatever information they have. Here's what I know now that I didn't fully know then. The moment someone tells you, directly or indirectly, through words or through actions, that you are worthless, they're telling you exactly how they have calculated your willingness to fight back. They are betting you won't. They are counting on it. My director lost that bet. So did my wife. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not healed completely either. But I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment that's entirely mine, with an investment account that nobody can touch, and a career that now runs through a different division of the same firm. A division that 6 weeks after my director left, offered me a senior project lead position. I took it. If this story made you feel something, maybe start with subscribing, because you clearly have good instinct about whose side to be on.